the seat of the soul. And you can see he did cuts in different directions, in the different planes. What we call the axial plane, which is slicing in the transverse plane, the slice in this direction, in the sagittal plane, and the coronal plane in that direction. And he said that here is the seat of the soul. He said the seat of the soul is where that question mark is there. And guess what? There is something that's pretty important in that position. Is there any clinician here who would like to mention what he thinks sits here in all of us? Yeah, the pituitary gland. And we do know the pituitary is an extremely important gland in controlling the endocrines. But let me take you back. The endocrines weren't discovered till the 1900s at University College in London. So you've got to put this in the context. Now this picture is known as the onion man. And I've used this picture for 40 odd years. When I started teaching medical students, I started using this picture to show the, to show the layers of the scalp. And you can see that the layers of the scalp were drawn by Leonardo like an onion, and he labeled each layer going in. And this is actually from my own textbook, which is coming out in 2 months' time, the latest edition. And you can see we teach it in exactly the same way. The skin, the cutaneous tissue, the aponeurosis, the loose areolar tissue, the periosteum, these are all words that the medical people will understand. But look at that. That's exactly how we're teaching it, and that's exactly how he drew it and made it in layers. But I also want to point out something interesting for all of you. You'll notice that he drew what are called the ventricles here. These are the hollows inside the brains, and he had it all wrong. And he made mistakes, and I'll show you in a minute what he did do, but he also drew that the coverings of the brain went round the eye. He actually drew the coverings of the brain, where the arrow is, went round the eye. And actually that is true. And if there's a neurologist in the audience, he'll confirm that the brain gives an outgrowth of the first and second cranial nerves, and that they're covered in the layer called the dura mater. And yet he drew that. Now I've tried dissecting it and I've not been able to do it, but he drew it in his actual treatise. He also commented that arteries and veins were different, and they had different consistency. You can see his beautiful drawings here. Nowadays, we can go more than one step further. We can actually go inside the skull, and this patient is alive and well and living in Warwick. And this is one of our patients, and that is the normal arterial supply of the whole brain. And this is what modern scanning can do. Quite amazing. Now, he wasn't able, obviously, I get the impression if he were up there now, he'd be looking down and going, oh, if only I'd had this technology when I was drawing. But you can see how accurately he's actually drawn the arteries and the veins on the skull. He also looked at things very visually. What he did in this drawing, there's the eye, there is the sinuses above the eye, these are the cranial nerves, there's the optic chiasma, and this is what we call the cavernous sinus, and he's got everything accurate in anatomy. Now, I know those of you that are medical will have remembered writing essays on the lateral wall of the cavernous sinus. It's the sort of question that comes up in medical exam. But what I want you to realize is, if you look at this picture, and then you look at the modern scan coming through the eye, you'll see the crossover of the optic chiasma. Oh, sorry, it's too sensitive. Let me just quickly go back. There. You see the optic chiasma here. If you look at this CT scan, and a series, and you will see the nerve coming out of the eye, coming down here and crossing over in exactly the same way as you can see here, number 18, in a cross-section from the Visible Human Project. These pictures were totally unique. No one had ever drawn the human body like that. Now, I showed you his picture of the ventricles a minute ago, and guess what? They were completely inaccurate, but 4 or 5 years later, he actually decided to do something completely novel. Some of you will know, if you're in the art world, about the cuillère perdue system. It's been used for thousands of years in Africa, where you inject wax into a cavity and you get a shape of a cavity, and then you can make a mold. And he was the first person ever to take a cavity in the human body, inject in the wax, then rot away the rest of the brain. And here you can see his drawings 5 years later of the inside cavities of the brain. These are called the lateral ventricles, the third ventricle, the fourth ventricle. And that is how we've done it in a modern way. And we've used, in fact, a polyresin instead of wax. And that is now how we can look at it on a CT scan. So we can see inside the brain. And yet he was the first person ever to have this idea that if you inject in, you can actually see. Now, some of you in the audience say, but that isn't exactly like a human ventricle. And the reason is, it isn't a human ventricle, it's a cow's brain. And what he did, he used a cow's brain, because obviously he couldn't very easily get hold of human brains. He had a limited amount of material. And one of the things that some of you may have read, if you've been interested in Leonardo da Vinci, in those days, in the 1490s, 1500s, it wasn't illegal to dissect human bodies. It was normal, and there was a papal bull in 1390 that said, we are very happy for you to find out the causes of disease and understand the human body. So you may well do dissection. Dissection was not banned, but Leonardo did the dissections himself. I have to tell you, although the quality on the picture has not come out particularly well, it is the most beautiful drawing of the spinal column. And what I want you to look at is the one down here with the 7 cervical vertebrae, absolutely accurately drawn. But what he did what we call an exploded view. It's something that we see nowadays in engineering. When you're looking at them trying to sell you a new car, what they do, they show you this exploded view. And he showed how the first, second, and third vertebrae of the neck region fit together. And that was quite an amazing idea, to actually do an exploded view. And he correctly, if you read the writing here, he said that the correct number of cervical vertebrae, the correct number of lumbar vertebrae, the correct number of thoracic vertebrae, but he did make one small error that I found. And if you actually count the number of spines, he said everything correctly, but he put an extra one in there. Now, I think he did it on purpose, so that years later, people would look at it and say, oh, we made an error on that one. Many artists used to do that, to try and tempt people to look at their pictures. I want you to look at these 8 pictures, because this is a concept that wasn't realized until the 1900s. All of you can recognize beautiful shoulder anatomy. And what you can see, he started at the back, and he went in 8 rotations. I'll show you this picture in a minute. And he did what I'm showing you here. This was actually done last week. This is a 3D reconstruction of a CT scan to match this shoulder dissection that he did. And what he was showing is he was showing the movement around the shoulder, so that you got the idea of a 3-dimensional structure. And that's exactly how a cartoonist makes a Mickey Mouse cartoon. If you go to Dream Worlds to go and see your 3D cartoon, which is the sort of thing, I don't know if you've actually, have you got 3D yet in Sarawak? Has anyone got 3D televisions? Are they available? Right, so it's beginning to catch on here. That's exactly what he was trying to do, was show the 3D, just like the cinematographic idea of movement. And you can see here, there's the next 4, there's the 8 movements he showed of the shoulder, so that it was the first idea that you were looking at it, and you could see this sort of movement to appreciate the 3 dimension of the shoulder. Quite a revolutionary idea. That wasn't realized for another 300 or 400 years by the cartoon and cinematographic film industry, if you like. Obviously nowadays we can do, amazingly, we can actually do that on a live patient. And here not only did he draw all the